The content of this episode may not be suitable for some audiences. Listener's discretion is advised. Welcome to the place of rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. My name is Jonathan Boyce, and it's my pleasure to bring to you today's episode. Virginia and I discuss how the idea of my truth fragments society and explore why open discourse is essential for applying universal principles that support life, liberty, and happiness. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Virginia, we discussed the last couple of weeks a little bit about the fact that we live in a culture that celebrates living your truth. But you've said that my truth is actually a lie, and it's one that's responsible for confusion, chaos, and dis-ease. So you've even drawn a line between believing these lies and the hemorrhaging heart of our nation. Why is the concept of my truth, which is actually, as you mentioned, my opinion, but why is that concept so dangerous to our anatomy, and how does R.E.S.T help us survive it?
Well, we have opinions, and our opinions are valid and they have merit. But the importance of opinions and open discourse and dialogue, which Charlie embraced, as we all know, and really just put his money where his mouth was and engage people in conversation, is because it's important to wrestle with our thoughts and our ideas in the context of conversation and relationship, so we can come to an understanding of what's true and what's not. And the reason that's important is it directly connects to what we're seeing happen in America, what we're living in America, what we're witnessing in America, is that this particular republic was established around universal principles. That means they're common to all man, right? They're common, they're universal to humanity, and they speak to the human condition. And not only are they universal, but they are self-evident. In other words, they're obvious and they appeal to our natural affection. So the concept of opinions is a law of nature. Everybody, they're as vast as our fingerprints and as unique as our fingerprints. But to establish balance, harmony, and coherence, which is essential for life, and it's what the founding principles of this republic, you need to be able to engage in the discourse of ideas to find what is true and what's not. And this principle is so important that in the Declaration of Independence, it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, universal, all men are created equal, and they have certain unalienable rights. Why? Because every life is sacred. And if every life has rights, that means there's something sacred about every life. And I'm just giving an example of a very hot topic, and it should be protected by, and it is protected by, our Constitution. That's why it was so egregious when the question of what is life, who has a right to protect it or decide when it expands and when it diminishes. That's why these questions go to the root of what's well documented in our Constitution. So we can all have opinions about many things, but there are these universal and very accessible principles that are common to all, that if we can discipline ourselves to engage in discourse, we can expand our opinions and refine our ideas to come at what is true, because it'll be beneficial to all. But just to bring this full circle, when you think about the rights of the individual and the uniqueness and the vast opinions that we have as individuals, but we live in a nation where we hold these truths where everything rises or falls on what's true and what's not to be self-evident. We can't just brush over these words as if they mean nothing. And the reason that is so instrumental in displacing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease, because lies are at the anatomy of confusion, chaos, and dis-ease. Not just misunderstandings and not just misinterpretations, but complete lies that are an assault at the end of the day on our very constitution. So if the focus is in airing our opinions, we're never going to get out of this position we find ourselves in. We will never have peace and we will never have rest if we don't understand these fundamental laws that our opinions are as vast as cells, molecules. I mean, they're just vast. They're infinite. Opinions are infinite. But the infinite is always can be understood within the confinements of time by things that are accessible to all of us. And it's this, something expands or diminishes my life. Well, what's going to expand and diminish my life is understanding these truths to be self-evident, truth that is obvious, that all men are created a spirit, a soul, and a body, and there's something sacred about that Trinitarian constitution of a human being that needs to be taken into account. And as you well know, that is the spine of rest. And that's why we experience the success we do, both with our general population and our first responders public, and dealing with everything from cancer to PTSD to autoimmune diseases, because there are these laws of nature that are self-evident that we can reason from. But we might have a lot of opinions about different things, but at the end of the day, our plumb line are these laws, universal principles that are self-evident and do speak to our natural affection. But we need to be willing to engage in discourse to displace our own ignorance, so we're not dumbfounded, and we don't slip into a stupor where we become stupid. Because when those three things are neglected, because we insist on holding on to our own opinions, we're going to become fools. And that's where death comes in. And that's where the violence we commit against our own conscience comes in. And that's dangerous stuff.
So let's break this down for people who are on two sides of an issue, or maybe parents versus children, or even husband versus wife. When a conversation starts out as discourse and then begins to devolve into a flat out argument, how do we help people get into a place of engaging with these self-evident truths?
Yeah. Okay. I'll go to three different spheres. Within myself, there's stories I tell myself. But now, for example, here at R.E.S.T, we have biometrics. We have different things that we can tell the disparity between a person saying and what their body's carrying. And therein lies the anatomy of the confusion, chaos, and disease. So every single day, we observe, we document, we have a data-driven, evidence-based program that we can prove to you that the things you're saying to yourself are not consistent with what your body's carrying. That means there's no agreement, there's no consent, there's no compliance within your own body. So the opinions that you keep verbalizing aren't consistent with the facts that your body's carrying. So what happens? There's discord within yourself. So our starting point is always helping people identify the conflict they have within themselves. That's at a clinical level what we do every single day, all day long. And that's why we see so much healing here. We're going to soon scale this nationally and communicate this to help implement this in doctor's office and clinics and treatment centers and whatnot. Okay. But that's a starting point for us. But in the most practical level right now, if you're listening to this, there have been times when you ran into a friend and say, oh, that you didn't want to talk to, that you've been avoiding, and you said, oh, I'm so sorry. I've been meaning to call you, but I've been so busy. That's a lie. You just spoke a lie. Your body in that moment, you think that's no big deal, but your body just suffered an insult committed by you, to yourself. That's called sin. You violated your own conscience. The fact is you didn't want to see this person. You didn't want to call them, and you can't stand spending time with them. So, I mean, that's a practical example. In an interpersonal relationship with our children, we're indulging our children to death. Oh, honey, yes, I saw that the new iPhone came out. That's fantastic. Well, put it on your Christmas list. Maybe you'll get it. While we're getting all this data and all this information saying that these electronic devices are killing our children. They're leading them to anxiety, to depression, to suicide. Now, we didn't know this 10, 15 years ago, but we know it now. So why is that mom or that dad or that stepmother, stepfather, aunt, uncle, whatever, why are they complying to appease that child or to give them something, maybe to buy intimacy with them, neglecting the time that child really needs? But you're promising a gift when you know inside the stuff you're reading, the research is coming across your television, your computer, your manuals, and you know this generation is in a lot of trouble. You just committed a violent act against yourself because you violated your own conscience. You went against what you knew was true. And your body in that moment is not doing too much. But I'm telling you that the compounding effects of that kind of violation of conscience, we have data and evidence that it is slowly killing you. In the ancient documents, those two transactions I just described about the conflicts we have within yourself are laid out very clearly. It's called sin. Sin is a violent act that we commit against ourselves because we violate the highest calling of our deepest conviction. And we do what feeds our impulses, our flesh, and the immediate I need, I want, and I deserve thing. Okay, that's how it shows up. That's how it shows up within you. You know you shouldn't eat something, but you eat it anyway because it brings you so much pleasure, which is okay. But you can't keep doing that forever because the severity of that compromise will escalate and you don't realize that your body is not cooperating with the poor choices that you're making because you're consuming wine and you know you're drinking too much, but you keep doing it. Vaping, you know you're vaping too much, but you keep doing it. That relationship that really you know you shouldn't be in, the conversation you know you shouldn't be having. Your body, believe it or not, you guys, doesn't cooperate with you while you're violating your conscience. It is a fine-tuned triune system and a conversation that's always going on between your spirit, your soul, your body. And you can tell who's speaking because your spirit will always give you a choice between life and death. Your soul, and you got to choose which you're going to align yourself with, good or bad, God or Satan, demonic influences or really positive, angelic, whatever, that guardian angel, you know, that's little hovering over you, the Holy Spirit or your flesh. However you want it, good energy, bad energy, I don't know. Call it whatever you want. But the existence of these polarizing forces vying for your attention are very there. Number one, spirit. Soul, number two, your mind, your heart, your will, your conscience, your feelings. That's where the primary sphere of government is. And you got to decide which voice you're going to listen to. And then, of course, there's the body that absorbs the shock of the decisions you make or will bear fruit of the blessings of how you privately live. Because nothing's in secret. Newsflash, there are no secrets. Your private life is evidenced, is projected by your very constitution. That's why when a person steps in a room, I'm not comfortable with this person. I trust this person. I don't trust this person. There's different things. Unless you violated your conscience so much that you're talking crap on everybody all the time and exercising judgments over everybody because you violated your own conscience so much, you're always judging everybody else. So that's where the application of that monologue in your person. I think I'll stop there, Jonathan, because whatever happens in the internal government of your own constitution, your own spirit, your soul, your body, honestly, is what shows up in the church. Those of you that are talking crap on the church, look inward first. And then those that are talking crap on the government, look inward first. Because every institution, specifically the family, the church, and the state, are all a fruit of what mom and dad are each individual is doing and how they're governing, how the husband and the wife showed up and how they're governing, and how their kids are learning to govern themselves. And then that shows up in the church and in the state. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Where do power and authority come in here? Because oftentimes we either confuse the two or we don't even know what they are.
I want to do a whole podcast on that, but let me just say that the power and the authority are regulated in the confinements of the soul of a person. That's why this concept of voluntary consent becomes really important. And America is the most generous nation in the world. Let's just take it to another sphere of government. And our churches really have been a stabilizing force in the philanthropic work that has been instrumental in maintaining the health of our nation. Why? Voluntary consent. A person chooses to give, participate, do, surrender, collaborate. But the key, it's that it's done according to the deepest conviction of the individual. That is more powerful than anything imposed on the individual, the family, and the church by the state. The state will always go bankrupt imposing that because it's going to have to take. But the beauty of our capacity to maintain and protect our freedom, if we can keep it, is to access our liberty, to understand that our capacity to self-govern means that we exercise power over our own impulses, over our central nervous system, and we use the authority that we have according to the dictates of design that are woven into our soul, our mind, our heart, our will, our conscience, and our feelings. That authority that's woven into our souls can be leveraged because remember, there's this other information system in the spiritual realm that's dishing out options, things that give life and things that diminish them, things that are good and things that are bad, things that are lawful, things that are unlawful, God or Satan, good energy, bad energy, convictions or desires. Those are that's what the spiritual realm is always putting before us. Hey, choose this day what you will serve, life or death. And here's the thing, who or what is going to govern you? Is it going to be the impulses of your flesh or is it going to be your deepest conviction of your spirit? But all that stuff is negotiated by the authority given to us in our very constitution. And that is the power to choose in that quantum field, if you will, that in the existential, and the reality of how we decide that in our soul. That's where authority is to me. And then, I don't know, I think power and authority is vested in there. And it needs to be really understood in the confinements of a person's own conscience. But that's too big of a subject. I'd like to discuss it and break that down in the next podcast, perhaps. These are, of course, are big ideas, right?
Yeah, they
Big
are.
ideas, but they have a very, very practical expression. And although I started with a narrative that perhaps will continue to refine, and in the next episode, I'll break even the introduction down more. But I do think that the practical explanation that I gave about what's happening within us in spheres, I think how we show up for ourselves, how we show up with our children, and how we show up in relationship, I think that those are enough to leverage perhaps a valid discussion of what we're witnessing in the church and in the state. Because it doesn't take a genius to criticize people, institutions, establishments, ideas, politics, which are the fruit of policies, right? It's not rocket science, but there's so much confusion, chaos, and disease and manipulation in how we discuss those things that it is not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of everyone listening, resolving to learn how to regulate themselves so they can engage and have honest discourse to perhaps wrestle through difficult conversations to find the truth. We hold these truths to be obvious and appeal to our natural affections right there.
When, let's just say again, a husband and wife are in an argument, it's gone from discourse to argument. How do we practically regain control over our own central nervous system and not just reacting to every trigger?
I've developed the habit of while I'm listening, take a pensive stance so you can let the other person know that you're not going to interrupt them. This is very difficult to do, especially when with our children, our husbands, our parents, and people that we're really comfortable with. And I think just taking a pensive stance, I noticed that when I'm really thinking about something, I put my two fingers, my index and my middle finger at my temple, and my ring finger goes in my mouth. And I didn't realize that, but when I'm really, really listening, I do that because it reminds me to be quiet, to silence the internal dialogue that I'm having about what they're saying, especially because I talk about this so much. I read about this so much. Just be quiet. And I wish I could say I do it successfully all the time, especially with my children and my husband and all that. And I don't do it as often as I'd like, but I need to hear with my ears, listen with my heart, and make sure that I can stop the person and say, let me see if I heard you correctly. Let me repeat what you said back to you. And it's to develop the discipline of extending another person the courtesy of at least making sure I heard them correctly. They're not asking me for my advice. They're not even asking me for my opinion. They just need to get something off their chest. My son, Caleb, is probably one of the best to say, hey, Mom, because he and I have gone at it like we do with our kids sometimes. And we've raised really independent thinking children that reason for themselves. And now they're adults. And it isn't always fun to engage them in this day and age when there's so much propaganda and lies and deception, to be patient with what another person might be bringing to the table. And especially in my line of work, I can get to the place where, no, and that's not what's happening. No, I know this. I know that. You don't know what you're talking about. And so really, I have to keep myself in check all the time because that is so rude. It is so inconsiderate. And when the point I'm making becomes more important than what's sacred about the person I'm speaking to, I should just shut up. Francis Schaeffer said, you've already lost the most important thing, and that is to love. You cannot love when you are not willing to listen to your spouse. So I would encourage putting your index fingers on your temple and biting your lips. In this case, I kind of sometimes just do nothing, or I fold my other little fingers around my chin. But it reminds me, Virginia, stop and listen. And listening means asking a question about first recapping what they said, and then ask them a curious question about what they said, not one that's setting them up so you can knock down what they said. But curiosity and listening, I think. But listening is very difficult. There's fantastic stuff on YouTube. Everybody this whole week should at least spend an hour looking on good listening to just sound integritous people on listening well. That's what's instrumental, to listen well. Stop trying to think about the point you're trying to make and be curious about what the person's trying to tell you by what they said. They're not even trying to make a point. They just need to be heard. And that's really what's happening. When somebody's really hurt or something's heavy on their heart, they just need to be heard. Caleb really taught me that well, with a great deal of grace and patience. Hey, I just want to be heard. I'm not even saying I'm right. I know I just need to vent for a minute. But what am I doing? I'm breaking it down to a 3-point outline and research and clips and data, and an EVOC scan is going through my mind. And who cares about all that stuff? He just needs me to be present and let him know that, I'll just stop right here because I could go on and on. The scripture, mourn with those who mourn, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, right? Just be present and carry each other's burdens. And you can't do that when somebody's talking to you and you're already developing an explanation and like I said, a dissertation on what they said, why they're wrong, why they're right, why it's a great idea, why not. Just don't do it. Every single living soul has a fingerprint that's unique to them. Every human being, every individual has a soul, a mind, a heart, a will, a conscience, and feelings. They're nothing like yours. Just like their fingerprint is very distinct. And imagine the complexity of their spirit. And they're trying to manage the very same things that you are trying to manage and govern. And they're trying to even do more than that. They're trying to be fruitful and multiply everything that they come in contact with, because that's how they were designed. And they're trying to subdue those things that are unique to them and unique to their creative forces and everything that comes in their spheres of influence. They're trying to manage all that. And a step further, then they need to govern what they've managed. And that is the triune constitution of every single homeless person on the street, every person in every pew of every religion all over the world. And you, me, we are not the center of the universe. It's the beauty of the communion that we have as individuals. Once we can regulate ourselves and understand our own constitution, right? So that we bring, that makes the world a beautiful place. But some people have limitations. Everybody has a story. An enemy is only somebody whose story you really don't know. And so I guess recognize that the triune constitution of every living and breathing person is made in the image of a triune God who says he's a spirit. He's given the Holy Spirit. Our conscience bears witness of that. And he's given his son. Our calendar measures that 2025 years ago, since Christ stepped into time. And we've got these measuring sticks, these gauges by which we can distinguish our opinions from facts, from the truth. We might not like the truth. I think there's times when all of us don't like the truth, but that doesn't mean you get to rewrite it. And this little word is so important that in one of the darkest times in the history of this republic, when they had to give up their time, their talent, and their treasure to establish a document that would preserve the triune, everything is sacred about a human being, I just described it, that they said, we, all of us, we need to acknowledge that this is a thing, a very real thing we're going to have to create containment for. We, all of us, universal, we need to create a place of containment for this. These, in many truths, but they lay them out and they start with one. We hold these truths, they're going to lay them out for you in a minute, to be self-evident. So how important is understanding that truth is not relevant? There are universal principles that are defined, well defined in that document, that are protected by a form of civil government that was going to be established. By the way, that's why all the world wants to come here. All the world wants to come to America. Even people that hate America, they don't want to leave, because this document that preceded the Constitution made a declaration to Europe, to the world, that there's these universal principles. And the first one was what? Life, the preservation of life. So I would say to everyone, be careful that in your enthusiasm, in your convictions, that you're advancing life, not diminishing it. Because if not, you're committing a violent act against yourself, and you will self-destruct. And you will take your marriage, your family, and your children down with you. And that is what is at the hemorrhaging heart of this nation right now. We've strayed from these universal principles, the first one being life, liberty, and just full-on happiness, external freedom. Life is spiritual, it's existential, it's a mystery. Liberty is the soul, its capacity to self-govern. And happiness is the fruit of those three things. And I would attach freedom to that. It's the only thing that can secure freedom. So when we get hell-bent on defending our opinions, I would say to everybody, please stop. Put your fingers on your temple. Fold the last two fingers around your chin area and ask yourself, wait, is what I'm doing right now and how I'm interpreting this situation, I don't care if it's a politician on television, I don't care what it is. Why am I spewing the things I'm spewing out? Where are they coming from? Is the conflict and the anger and the rage and the resentment and the bitterness really within myself about things I've not reconciled within myself? Because that's the primary sphere of government. And when you don't manage that, you will slowly die. And you will die prematurely. There's a natural death, but there's a premature death. And if you're asking, what about babies? Well, the psychology of the parents becomes the biology of the children. And unresolved conflicts that I'm talking about evolve when we're hell-bent on expressing our opinions, neglecting truth. They get passed on to your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. It does not end with you. Everything begins with you.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about R.E.S.T, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of R.E.S.T. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of R.E.S.T, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.